Hello guys, I'm glad you're here tonight. Before we dive into the story, let me ask you something. Where are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? I always find it fascinating to imagine people scattered across the world. Some lying in bed, others maybe on a late walk, and a few perhaps with headphones on during a long commute. And now, let's step together into a time that feels both distant and very close. The days of the Second World War, when thousands of men found themselves not on solid ground but on the restless surface of the sea. Imagine being a young man in the early 1940s, perhaps 19 or 20, barely out of school. The world has erupted into chaos, and you're told your duty is to board a ship, a steel beast that will carry you across oceans filled with danger. Life as a sailor during the Second World War was unlike anything most people could ever imagine. It wasn't just about fighting battles, although battles were part of it. It was about endurance, about living every single day with the vast horizon stretching endlessly in all directions, and the knowledge that beneath you was a dark ocean that could swallow you whole in a heartbeat. From the moment you stepped on board, the ship became your entire world. There was the smell of oil and salt water, the clanging of metal as hammers struck steel, the ever-present vibration of the engines below deck. You'd hear boots echoing on narrow passageways, the bark of officers giving commands, and sometimes, in the quieter hours, the haunting creak of the hull as it flexed against the waves. Everything you owned fit into a small locker, maybe a spare shirt, a photograph of family, and a few personal items that reminded you of home. Daily routines were strict. The Navy lived by discipline, because discipline was the only thing that kept order in a floating fortress where hundreds of men were crammed together in tight spaces. You woke when the bells rang, whether it was dawn or midnight, because time on board wasn't like time on land. Sailors worked in shifts called watches, often 4 hours on duty and 4 hours off. That meant sleeping in short bursts and always being ready to spring up if the alarm sounded. The food was nothing like home-cooked meals, though you ate enough to survive. Breakfast might be powdered eggs, bread that was sometimes already hard, and coffee strong enough to make your eyes widen. Later in the day, meals could be stew made from canned meat, dried potatoes, and vegetables that rarely tasted fresh. On better days, there might be fruit, apples or oranges, though these disappeared quickly. For sailors on long voyages, fresh produce was like treasure, rationed carefully so that a single orange might be split among several men. And yet, despite the plain food, mealtime was sacred. It was one of the few times everyone could gather, joke, and forget, just for a few minutes, how dangerous the world outside the steel walls really was. Entertainment was scarce, but sailors found ways. Some carried harmonicas or small instruments, and music would drift through the ship on calmer nights. Others told stories, endless stories, about girlfriends back home, about farms they left behind, about what they'd do after the war. There were card games, makeshift boxing matches, even little libraries tucked away with tattered books that passed from hand to hand. One day you might be deep into a novel, and the next, it could be ripped from you by a friend who just couldn't wait to see how it ended. But with the entertainment came the constant shadow of danger. Every sailor knew the sea could turn against them, not only with storms but with enemies. Submarines prowled beneath the waves, silent hunters whose torpedoes could split a ship in seconds. Sailors would lie awake at night, listening to the low hum of the engines, wondering if somewhere below them, unseen eyes were tracking their every move. The threat wasn't only from submarines. Aircraft could swoop down without warning, guns blazing, bombs screaming. Convoys tried to protect each other, a pack of ships moving together, guarded by destroyers that zigzagged to hunt down threats. But even in a convoy, no ship ever felt truly safe. And yet, life had to go on. You still had to scrub the decks, polish the brass, check the machinery. The discipline of daily tasks was almost a comfort, a way to pretend life was normal. There was always something to fix, always something to clean, because a ship at sea never stopped needing attention. Sailors joked that the sea rusted everything the moment it was made, and their job was simply to fight rust all day long. Sometimes there were odd moments of beauty too. Standing on deck during a night watch, you could see stars spread so widely across the sky that it felt like you were floating through the heavens themselves. The water glowed with bioluminescent creatures, sparks of light trailing in the wake of the ship. In those moments, the war seemed far away, and you might even forget, for just a breath, that danger was waiting beyond the horizon. Still, there was always the uncertainty of tomorrow. Sailors wrote letters whenever they could, though they knew the words might take months to reach home, and by the time replies arrived, so much could have changed. News was scarce too, often arriving in fragments. Rumors whispered between watches. Some men swore they'd heard the war would be over in a matter of months, while others whispered about terrible defeats. The truth was usually somewhere in between, but hope was what kept them alive, even when the waves tossed their ship like a toy. So being a sailor in the Second World War was never just one thing. It was fear and courage, boredom and exhaustion, routine and sudden chaos. It was the taste of salt on your lips, the ache of muscles from endless work, the laughter of friends in stolen moments, and the weight of knowing you might never see land again. And yet, thousands lived it, day after day, crossing oceans in ships that became their only home. The longer you stayed at sea, the more the ship became not just a workplace but a kind of floating town, with its own unwritten rules, its own gossip, and its own small dramas that played out between men who had no escape from one another. Every corner of the vessel carried memories of conversations, arguments, or quiet moments of thought. A narrow passageway might be the place where two sailors whispered about their sweethearts, while the mess hall echoed with laughter when someone told a joke so bad that it became funny just because of how terrible it was. But the truth of life on board was that boredom was just as dangerous as battle. Time stretched out across the horizon, and days blurred together. The watch system, those 4-hour shifts, meant you rarely knew what day it was, let alone the hour. Sometimes you would stumble out onto the deck in the middle of the night, half asleep, only to be greeted by a sky so clear that the stars seemed close enough to touch. Other times, a storm would rage so fiercely that even the most seasoned sailors held tight to the railings, praying not to be thrown across the slippery deck. Storms were their own kind of battle. Imagine being below deck as the ship rose and fell like a toy in a giant's hand. Plates clattered, men cursed, water leaked through seams, and every creak of the hull made you wonder if the steel might simply split in two. Seasickness was relentless. Men turned pale, their stomachs emptied again and again, and yet work had to continue. Engines needed tending, weapons had to be ready, and watches couldn't simply be abandoned because the sea decided to remind everyone who was in charge. And then there were the convoys. A sailor never forgot the sight of dozens of ships stretched out across the water, each carrying vital cargo: food, fuel, weapons, and sometimes even troops. The line of vessels looked both impressive and fragile, like ducks swimming in a row while predators circled beneath the surface. Escorts zigzagged constantly, sonar pinging into the deep in search of submarines. Everyone knew that one successful torpedo could turn a cargo ship into a burning, sinking wreck. The knowledge sat heavy on every sailor's chest, especially during long nights when the ocean was too calm, too quiet, as if holding its breath before the attack. The first time most sailors heard depth charges go off was unforgettable. The ship would shake with a thunderous boom, plates rattling, lights flickering, as the charges exploded somewhere in the depths. Even if the submarine wasn't hit, the sound alone was enough to make every man acutely aware of how fragile their survival was. Some swore they could hear the groan of metal beneath the water, the twisting pressure of a sub trying to escape. Others admitted later that their hands trembled for hours afterward, even as they went about routine tasks. But it wasn't all fear. There were small victories too. The day a convoy made it safely into port was a celebration, even if it was quiet and practical. Men would step onto land and breathe air that wasn't mixed with salt and oil. They'd stretch their legs, and for a short while, they'd feel human again. Maybe they'd buy fresh bread or fruit, something that didn't come from a can. Maybe they'd even find a cafe, hear laughter and music from civilians who, for a brief moment, made them forget the war. On board, Camaraderie was the glue that held everything together. Sailors relied on one another not only for survival but for sanity. Friendships were forged quickly and deeply, because in a world where death was always a possibility, you clung to whatever warmth you could find. A joke shared at midnight, a cigarette passed between tired hands, a song hummed softly in the corner of a bunk room. These moments were lifelines. And when a ship lost one of its men, the silence that followed was deafening. The empty bunk, the untouched mug, the absence in the daily routine. It was all too real. Superstitions flourished too. Sailors are famous for their beliefs, and during the war, they became even more powerful. Some refused to whistle on deck, claiming it would call the wind. Others believed a certain charm or photograph protected them from danger. There were men who swore they could feel when a submarine was near, their skin prickling before any sonar picked up a sound. Logic had little power against fear, and superstition became a shield just as much as the steel of the ship. Letters from home were treasures beyond price. When mail arrived, men tore open envelopes with hands that shook, hungry for words from mothers, wives, girlfriends, or children. A single page could be read 100 times, folded carefully, tucked into pockets, and carried through storms and battles alike. The smell of the paper, the handwriting, even a smudge from someone's hand. It was all a connection to a world that felt impossibly far away. Some men kept their letters hidden in their lockers, while others pinned them near their bunks like talismans against despair. Even the way sailors slept was shaped by the ship. Bunks were stacked like shelves, narrow and uncomfortable, with little privacy. The constant noise of the engines was a lullaby for some and a torment for others. You learned to sleep with boots nearby, because alarms could sound at any time, dragging you from dreams into the reality of rushing feet, shouted orders, and the metallic taste of adrenaline. And always there was the ocean, the endless, rolling sea that could be both beautiful and cruel. On calm days it sparkled like glass, stretching so far that you felt small and insignificant beneath the vast sky. On stormy days it became a monster, smashing against the hull, soaking every man on deck, roaring louder than any human voice. Sailors joked that the ocean was their oldest enemy and their oldest friend. It carried them to safety and to danger, to ports and to battles, and it never stopped reminding them who truly held power. So life at sea during the Second World War was a strange mixture of monotony, fear, laughter, exhaustion, and fleeting joy. Every sunrise brought the possibility of peace or disaster, and every sunset carried with it the relief of having survived one more day. For the men who lived it, those years on the ocean were carved forever into their memories, shaping not just their lives but the stories they would tell long after the war was over. There came moments when the ocean, usually so vast and empty, suddenly became a battlefield. For days or weeks, a convoy might travel without sighting anything more threatening than a distant gull. And then, without warning, the calm would break. A sharp cry, the blast of an alarm, the pounding of boots against the deck. Sailors knew instantly that something had shifted. The ordinary world of swabbing decks, repairing cables, and telling jokes over coffee vanished, replaced by a single thought: survival. When the first streak of a torpedo cut through the water, men felt time stretch unbearably long. A white wake against the deep blue sea could be more terrifying than 1,000 enemies on land. If it missed, there was relief, but only for a moment because everyone knew another could be coming. If it struck, the sound was unforgettable. A roar, a violent shudder through steel, screams mixing with the groan of a wounded ship. Sailors who weren't hit watched helplessly as cargo ships burst into flames, oil spreading across the water like a black, choking skin, men leaping desperately into lifeboats or sometimes straight into the sea, trusting cold waves over fire. For those still afloat, the battle became chaos. Guns thundered, tracer rounds stitched the sky, and escorts dropped depth charges that rattled bones as they detonated below. Sailors not manning weapons scrambled to help, hauling shells, carrying the wounded, dousing fires with hoses that sprayed seawater in desperate streams. Every man had a role, and if he didn't, he found one, because idleness in such moments felt unbearable. And yet, what struck many sailors most was the waiting. Between bursts of action came long silences, broken only by the sound of the ship pushing through waves. You never knew if the enemy was gone or simply biding their time, lining up for another strike. The sea, endless and uncaring, swallowed ships and men without hesitation. And sometimes a battle ended not with victory but with an eerie quiet, the survivors sailing on as though nothing had happened, except for the empty spaces where ships once had been. Rumors always followed battles. Sailors whispered about enemy submarines that stalked convoys for weeks, about ghost ships that appeared at night only to vanish by dawn. Some swore they'd seen strange lights in the water, signals between submarines, though officers dismissed them as tricks of the eye. Others told of sailors who jumped into the sea and were never seen again, not because they drowned, but because something pulled them under. Rational minds blamed exhaustion, fear, and the ocean's cruel nature. Still, stories spread, passed from bunk to bunk during quiet watches, giving the sea an almost supernatural edge. Coping with fear became a kind of art. Some men threw themselves into work, polishing brass until it gleamed, checking ropes again and again, repairing things that weren't broken just to keep their hands busy. Others sought comfort in laughter, telling jokes so outrageous that the absurdity itself was a form of defiance. A few turned to prayer, whispering words into the darkness, asking for safety not only for themselves but for the ship as a whole. There were even men who carried good luck charms, a coin, a piece of cloth, a small trinket from home, and swore that as long as it was with them, they would survive. But not all coping mechanisms were healthy. Sailors drank heavily when they reached port, desperate to forget. Some gambled away their pay in card games that stretched through entire nights. Others sank into silence, withdrawing from the laughter and camaraderie around them. These men worried their comrades, because silence could be dangerous on a ship where teamwork meant survival. And yet, judgment was rare. Everyone knew that fear wore different masks, and sometimes, the only thing you could offer was quiet understanding. The sea also shaped the imagination. Long stretches without action led men to daydream about life after the war. One sailor might describe in vivid detail the small house he wanted to build, complete with a porch where he'd sit with his future wife. Another spoke endlessly of owning a car, the kind that roared down country roads, free from the endless horizon of water. These dreams were contagious, passed around like cigarettes, offering everyone a taste of something beyond steel walls and salt air. When danger passed and calm returned, life resumed its strange rhythm. Sailors would patch holes, scrub away soot, repaint railings scorched by fire. The ship bore scars of every encounter, and so did the men. They carried memories of faces lost, of last words shouted over roaring engines, of the sickening smell of burning fuel. But they also carried pride, the knowledge that they had endured one more test, that their ship still moved forward while others had fallen behind. Nighttime after a battle was different. The stars seemed sharper, the sea darker, as if the world itself had changed. Men smoked cigarettes in silence, their eyes reflecting faint glows of ember, each lost in his own thoughts. Some replayed the battle in their minds again and again, hearing the crash of guns and the hiss of fire. Others forced themselves to think of home, clinging to memories of childhood streets, of laughter around family tables, of lives that felt impossibly far away but still alive inside them. The truth was, being a sailor during the Second World War wasn't just about fighting, it was about enduring. It was about carrying fear without letting it break you, about living in cramped spaces where privacy didn't exist, about finding laughter in the darkest places. It was about seeing the ocean as both protector and enemy, a vast, unfeeling presence that could hide danger beneath its calm surface or carry you safely to port. And through it all, men learned to adapt. They learned to live with the constant uncertainty, to trust in their shipmates, and to hold on to hope, even when the horizon seemed endless and the war had no clear end in sight. The sea tested them every day, and every day they rose to meet it, not because they wanted to, but because they had no other choice. As weeks dragged into months, sailors discovered that one of their greatest enemies was not always the submarine or the bomber overhead, but the steady gnaw of monotony. Days blurred together until a man could hardly tell Tuesday from Friday. The sea offered the same horizon again and again, an unbroken circle that swallowed every direction. Even the sound of the ship itself, the grinding of machinery, the steady thrum of the engines, the slap of water against the hull, became so constant that it seemed to echo inside your skull. Men searched desperately for ways to break the sameness. Routine became a shield against madness. At dawn, decks were scrubbed until they shone, even if they were only to be soaked again by the next wave. Guns were polished, ropes coiled neatly, brass fittings buffed to catch the sunlight. A sailor might spend hours untangling a length of line that had no real purpose, simply because doing something with his hands kept the restless thoughts at bay. Food, though plain, became another ritual. The mess hall filled with the clatter of tin trays, the sharp smell of strong coffee, and the occasional cheer when cooks managed something different. Maybe rice pudding, maybe fried bread, or on rare occasions, a slice of fresh meat that hadn't come out of a tin. These small luxuries were celebrated as though they were feasts. Men joked that the cook was the most important man on the ship, because a good meal could soften even the hardest day. Games became lifelines. Card decks grew soft from constant use, dice rolled endlessly across tables, and poker games ran until men were nearly falling asleep at the table. Some sailors carved small pieces of wood into shapes, whittling figurines or chess pieces to pass the time. Others wrote in journals, recording not just battles but the minutiae of daily life. How the sea looked that morning, how a certain joke made them laugh until their stomachs ached, how a letter from home changed the whole mood of the mess for an evening. And then there were the rituals. Sailors have always been a superstitious breed, but during the war, those beliefs deepened into almost sacred acts. Some refused to cut their hair at sea, convinced it brought bad luck. Others never touched the ship's bell except when ordered, believing that an unnecessary ring invited disaster. There were ceremonies too, especially when crossing the equator for the first time, where sailors new to the ocean's traditions were playfully hazed by veterans who claimed the right brought protection. Laughter, splashing water, and painted faces turned the deck into a stage where men briefly forgot the seriousness of their mission. Music floated through the ship whenever someone found the energy to play. A harmonica's thin wail, the strum of a guitar, even a man tapping rhythmically against a metal cup, all became ways to remind one another that they were still human, still capable of joy. Songs from home echoed through narrow passageways, some cheerful, some melancholy, and for a few minutes, men could close their eyes and imagine streets, bars, and kitchens far away. The psychological toll, however, was real. Months without seeing land weighed heavily on the spirit. Some men confessed they dreamed of grass, of trees swaying in the wind, of the smell of earth after rain. The absence of these simple things made them almost mythical in the sailors' minds, treasures more valuable than gold. The sea offered no scent except salt and oil, no colors except the endless blues and grays of water and sky. Even a single bird flying overhead drew cheers, a reminder that somewhere, not impossibly far away, there was land. Sleep offered little escape. Bunks were narrow, the air often hot and stale, filled with the sound of snores, coughs, and restless bodies turning in their hammocks. Dreams often carried the same themes: waves, storms, battles, so that waking life and sleeping life blurred into a single experience. Some men found themselves waking in the middle of the night, unsure if the alarm that rang was real or only in their minds. Others spoke of the silence after battle following them into their dreams, a silence heavy enough to wake them in sweat. And yet, camaraderie continued to keep the worst of despair at bay. Laughter echoed down steel corridors, and even the smallest prank became legendary. Someone might hide another man's boots, only to return them hours later with a wink. Someone else might draw a crude cartoon and pin it to the mess wall, sparking waves of laughter that rippled across the entire crew. These moments became stories retold for days, their humor stretched and exaggerated until they became larger than life. Still, everyone knew the war pressed on, even if the sea sometimes seemed to swallow its noise. News trickled in slowly, whispers of victories in far-off places, rumors of defeats. The details were often wrong, but men clung to them anyway, weaving them into stories that filled long nights. Some believed the war would end within months, others said it would drag on for years, and a few muttered darkly that it might never end at all. The truth mattered less than the hope, because without it, there was only the endless horizon. Every so often, drills reminded sailors that monotony was only a disguise for danger. Alarms would sound without warning, and men would scramble to their stations, loading weapons, bracing for torpedoes, or donning life vests. Sometimes the drill ended in laughter, a chance to shake off rust and tension. Other times, the silence after the alarm was heavier than the drill itself, because everyone knew the next time might not be practice. So life at sea during those long stretches was like walking a tightrope between boredom and terror. Too much time made men restless, yet every sudden noise reminded them of how fragile their existence truly was. And through it all, the ocean remained unchanged, vast, eternal, and indifferent, a mirror of the war itself, swallowing joy and fear alike while the ships carried on, inch by inch, toward destinations unknown. Every sailor's mind carried a quiet longing for land, and the rare sight of a port was both a blessing and a burden. Ships approached harbor slowly, engines throttled down, sails and flags snapping faintly in the wind. Men crowded the rails, scanning for docks, cranes, and the tiny glimmer of buildings that promised rest, food, and a temporary escape from the endless waves. Even the smell of a foreign port was intoxicating. The faint tang of smoke from chimneys, the scent of unfamiliar spices in the air, the subtle sweetness of bread baking in ovens. It was a perfume of civilization, a brief reminder that the world continued beyond steel walls and endless saltwater. Stepping onto land brought a dizzying mixture of relief and anxiety. Men stretched legs that had grown stiff from weeks on deck, breathed deeply the heavier air, and savored each step on solid ground. Port towns buzzed with activity. Dockworkers shouted orders, merchants hawked goods, children ran along the quays, and music spilled from taverns. Sailors wandered through streets, sometimes alone, sometimes in small groups, exchanging stories in hushed tones or laughter that seemed almost too loud against the unfamiliar sounds of a new place. Every doorway, every alley offered a chance to forget the war for a fleeting hour. Food was always the first priority. After months of canned rations and powdered eggs, fresh bread, roasted meat, and even the simplest vegetables became treasures. Cafes and small restaurants drew sailors like moths to a flame, and every meal felt like an indulgence. Some splurged on sweets, devouring pastries or chocolate bars with the kind of hunger that made their stomachs ache and their minds briefly forget the lurking dangers of the sea. Alcohol was another temptation, and while officers monitored intake, men found ways to share a pint, toast to victories, or drown the memory of a lost comrade. The laughter that followed was often tinged with the knowledge that it might be the last moment of such freedom for weeks, maybe months to come. Yet ports were never completely safe. The shadows of war lingered even in the brightest streets. Sailors were cautious of local rumors, of unknown faces that lingered too long, and of the distant sound of gunfire or air raid sirens. Ships themselves were always visible, looming in the harbor like guardians and reminders that no matter how warm the sun or sweet the bread, the world outside had teeth. Men returned to their vessels carrying the relief of temporary safety, but also a sobering awareness that the next voyage might bring violence, loss, or storm. Entertainment at port offered more variety than the ship could provide. Some men visited theaters or cinemas, laughing or crying along with strangers, while for a moment forgetting the monotony of deck life. Others explored small marketplaces, marveling at goods they had never seen. Bright fabrics, intricate tools, and strange foods that promised a taste of lives untouched by the war. Even a walk along a quiet quay offered sensory richness. The cry of gulls, the slap of waves against the dock, the whisper of wind through ropes and rigging. These moments, small as they were, became stories told back on deck, embellished and passed from bunk to bunk, sustaining morale until the next visit. Still, leaving a port was never easy. The ship's engines would churn, ropes tightened, and sailors would step back onto deck with a strange mixture of relief and melancholy. Land felt like a friend who could not be carried along, and the return to open water reminded them of the fragile balance between survival and vulnerability. The horizon stretched endlessly once again, as if mocking every step taken on solid ground, and the rituals of life at sea resumed. Decks were scrubbed, machinery checked, guns polished, and meals rationed. Men fell back into the rhythm of watches, drills, and endless anticipation, carrying with them the taste of fresh food, laughter, and fleeting freedom like a secret treasure hidden beneath clothing and boots. Sometimes, sailors found themselves reflecting on the differences between ports. A bustling city might feel thrilling yet intimidating, while a quiet village offered comfort but also eeriness, as if life on land itself was a fragile illusion. Rumors always spread quickly about which towns were safe, which harbored spies, or which had black market traders selling goods too good to be true. Sailors compared notes in the mess hall, their observations blending fact with exaggeration until each port became a legend in its own right, a story retold to sustain imagination and morale during long stretches of nothing but sea. And yet, no matter how alluring a port, the pull of the ocean was inexorable. Men always returned to their posts, climbing the gangways with a mix of resignation and familiarity, as if the ship itself had a claim over them. The sea demanded discipline, endurance, and vigilance, and it gave nothing in return but the continuation of life, day by day. Some sailors whispered that the ocean had a memory, that it remembered every man who had crossed it, marking their presence in waves, currents, and storms. Others laughed at the idea, yet even they felt it, the subtle tug of water against hull and hull, the faint pressure of waves beneath boots, the sensation that the world beyond the horizon existed for everyone except those trapped upon it. Life at sea shaped men in ways that few could understand. They learned patience, ingenuity, and resilience. They learned to laugh at danger and find small pleasures in monotonous routines. They learned that the tiniest victories, an undamaged ship, a full meal, a successful drill, could sustain a man's spirit in ways words could never describe. And every day, every mile traveled over waves both calm and tempestuous, carried with it the possibility of discovery, terror, camaraderie, and the silent, steady presence of the ocean that held them all in its vast, indifferent embrace. Life at sea was never truly predictable, and some days brought moments so sharp and sudden that sailors barely had time to react before the world changed around them. One moment, the ocean seemed calm, stretching flat and endless under a pale sky. The next, alarms would scream, boots pounding against wet steel, and men were hurled into action with no warning. Torpedoes streaked through the water, sometimes invisible until they struck, sometimes missed by inches, and the roaring engines of enemy aircraft cut through the air like hunting beasts. Sailors learned quickly that hesitation could be fatal, and instinct often replaced reason in the heat of danger. When a ship came under attack, every roll became critical. Gunners swung heavy cannons with precise timing, aiming at planes that dived in arcs, while engineers in the bowels of the vessel worked feverishly to maintain engines under stress, checking gauges, pumping fuel, and making adjustments that could mean the difference between sinking and survival. Men who usually spent hours scrubbing decks now carried wounded comrades, applied first aid, and helped extinguish fires sparked by strafing or explosions. The cacophony of battle, the roar of guns, the shriek of shells, the frantic orders shouted above it all, became a rhythm that sailors learned to navigate as best they could, even as fear gnawed at their nerves. Some attacks came from beneath the water, silent and invisible. Submarines lurking in the depths could unleash torpedoes without warning, and even a single lucky hit could devastate a convoy. Sailors learned to read the waves, subtle shifts in the water, and even the behavior of birds overhead, believing that instinct and experience could sometimes save them where technology failed. Depth charges were dropped in response, shaking the ship from keel to mast, rattling bones and hearts alike, leaving men dizzy, soaked, and shaking from adrenaline. Every explosion reminded them how fragile the steel under their feet really was. Amid the chaos, small acts of courage and ingenuity defined survival. One sailor might leap across slick decks to shut a hatch, while another risked exposure to rescue a fallen comrade. Simple tools were repurposed creatively. A wrench became a lever, a rope a lifeline, a tin of grease a shield against sparks. Sailors learned to improvise constantly, because when the ocean itself seemed to conspire with the enemy, standard procedures were often insufficient. Stories of these moments traveled quickly, whispered and retold during long watches, inspiring others while keeping morale alive. Yet not every danger could be faced with action. The emotional toll of witnessing death, of hearing friends vanish into flames or waves, became a quiet companion that haunted bunk rooms and deck spaces alike. Men carried memories of faces frozen in shock, of screams that could not be silenced, of letters never sent and voices that would never be heard again. Some sailors became stoic, their emotions hidden beneath layers of routine and discipline. Others found themselves snapping at small annoyances, their nerves frayed from unrelenting tension. Sleep, when it came, was haunted by echoes of battle, the distant rumble of waves and explosions lingering in dreams, blurring the line between waking and memory. Stories spread about miraculous escapes. One ship might survive a torpedo attack with minimal damage because a sailor noticed a minor misalignment in a hatch and corrected it just in time. Another crew might avoid disaster because a lookout spotted a distant periscope cutting through the water, alerting gunners and evasive maneuvers that saved hundreds of lives. These tales became legends, growing with each retelling, teaching lessons and inspiring hope in men who had seen too much destruction to believe in luck alone. Even in calmer moments, danger remained a constant shadow. A sudden storm could throw a ship into chaos as easily as a submarine. Waves smashed against hulls, water poured into open hatches, and ropes and equipment became deadly hazards as they swung with the force of the sea. Sailors clung to anything solid, working together to secure cargo, reinforce rigging, and prevent disaster. Exhaustion became normal, and yet vigilance never wavered, because one small lapse could have catastrophic consequences. The human connections forged under these circumstances were extraordinary. Men became inseparable not because they chose to, but because survival depended on trust. Each handshake, nod, or quiet glance carried weight. A shared laugh in the mess hall, even fleeting, became a lifeline. Letters from home offered comfort, but it was the immediate presence of comrades, men who had seen the same explosions, felt the same fear, and sweated under the same storms, that formed bonds stronger than most on land could understand. Yet despite the horror and intensity, life continued in small, subtle ways. Sailors would share stories of past exploits, make bets on which lookout could spot enemy planes first, argue over trivial matters like card games or the best method to polish brass. These moments weren't distractions, they were survival tools. In a world where the next day might bring fire and destruction, laughter, routine, and camaraderie became as vital as food, water, and ammunition. And through it all, the sea watched silently, indifferent to fear, courage, or suffering. It offered no guidance, no mercy, only its endless, shifting surface. Sailors learned to read it, respect it, and fear it, but they never tamed it. The horizon remained an eternal boundary, sometimes promising safety, sometimes bringing destruction, always reminding men that while they could act bravely, ultimate control belonged not to them but to the water, wind, and steel beneath their feet. So being a sailor during World War II was a life of contrasts. Moments of terror and moments of triumph, boredom and exhilaration, despair and fleeting joy. Every sunrise brought both risk and routine. Every sunset carried exhaustion and relief. And every mile traveled across the waves was a test of endurance, skill, and spirit. And yet, despite the constant threat, men carried on, step by step, wave by wave, bound to one another and to a duty far larger than themselves, navigating not only the ocean but the invisible tides of fear, hope, and courage that shaped every day at sea. Even when the battle subsided, sailors faced another enemy: scarcity. Supplies were rationed meticulously, and the monotony of meals wasn't just about taste. It was survival. Canned meat, powdered eggs, and hard biscuits became the staples of life, each bite a reminder that indulgence was fleeting and every morsel mattered. Fresh food was a rare luxury, often a cause for celebration when a convoy returned safely to port with fruits, vegetables, or meat untouched by the long journey. The ability to stretch rations, combine flavors creatively, and even find small pleasures in the most basic ingredients became essential. Some sailors would make stews from the oddest combinations, adding a pinch of this or a scrap of that to create something vaguely edible yet comforting. A small success in the galley could lift morale for days. Ingenuity didn't stop at food. Every corner of the ship became a workshop for clever solutions. Leaks were patched with whatever was at hand. Canvas, wire, even old boots stuffed into holes. Sailors improvised tools constantly. A hammer became a lever, a rope a pulley, a tin of grease a lubricant or a makeshift seal. When the radio broke down, men rigged their own antennas, soldering circuits with trembling hands while engines thrummed below, listening to every creak and groan of the ship as if the steel itself whispered advice. These small acts of invention were quietly celebrated, their success often shared with a grin and a knowing look, and they saved more lives than most realized. Leisure between battles was another kind of necessity. Games and small competitions became ways to maintain sanity. Men raced up and down ladders, challenged each other to see who could tie knots fastest, or bet on who would spot the first seagull. Card games consumed hours, the shuffle of the deck becoming a comforting rhythm against the monotony of waves. Sailors also read when books were available, passing volumes hand to hand, sharing stories of adventures, far-off lands, or even philosophical musings to spark conversation and distraction. The written word became a lifeline to a world beyond the steel walls and salt air. Rumors and stories spread quickly, often taking on lives of their own. Tales of submarines spotted far away, of ghost ships drifting through fog, or of naval victories elsewhere fed the imagination. Some men swore they had heard whispers of spies in port towns, of civilians helping enemy forces, or of treasures hidden in sunken wrecks. Even the most skeptical nodded, because in a world where life could be measured in hours, hope and imagination were as vital as discipline and courage. Sailors developed a rhythm with the sea, learning to read subtle changes in wind and current. They felt when storms were approaching, when tides shifted unexpectedly, or when a distant ship was changing course suspiciously. Experience turned into instinct, and instinct became survival. The ocean was both classroom and adversary, teaching lessons in patience, observation, and endurance that few on land could ever comprehend. Even small things, a gull's cry, the shimmer of phosphorescence in waves, a faint rumble below the surface, could offer vital clues. Despite the hardships, camaraderie remained the foundation of life on board. Men celebrated birthdays quietly, shared letters from home, or told exaggerated tales of adventures past, creating laughter that seemed almost defiant in the face of danger. Small kindnesses, offering a cigarette, sharing a bit of extra rations, helping a comrade with a task, became acts of survival in themselves. Bonds formed in the crucible of the sea were unbreakable, rooted in mutual dependence, trust, and the knowledge that life could change in an instant. Sleep, though precious, was always tentative. Hammocks swung with the motion of the ship, often shared with more than one man to conserve space. The constant drone of engines, the slap of water, and the occasional crash of equipment made uninterrupted rest impossible. Dreams often mirrored reality. Men found themselves climbing slick decks, hauling ropes, or diving into waves, only to awaken to the same steel and salt they had fallen asleep upon. Yet even fractured sleep provided small relief, a pause in the relentless tension of life at sea. Sailors also found solace in small traditions and rituals. Superstitions were observed meticulously. Never whistle on deck, always touch a charm before entering a storm, never speak of a safe return too loudly. Rituals for crossing the equator, simple ceremonies for holidays, and even personalized routines for waking or eating offered a sense of control in a world where control was rare. These traditions, handed down through generations, anchored men against despair, providing continuity and a sense of safety in a vast and indifferent ocean. The sea, for all its challenges, also offered moments of breathtaking beauty. Sunrises painted skies in shades of gold and crimson, reflecting across waters so calm they seemed endless. Bioluminescent plankton glimmered like stars beneath the hull at night, creating an illusion that the ship floated not on water but on a galaxy. Even storms, with their lightning and crashing waves, inspired awe, a reminder that nature itself wielded power far beyond human control. These moments were savored quietly, often in shared silence, a fleeting peace in a world dominated by conflict. And so, sailors moved through days of tedium, nights of sleeplessness, and moments of terror with the same constant: resilience. Each small victory, whether patching a leak, preparing a meal, surviving a skirmish, or simply enduring another day, added to a tapestry of experience and memory. They became masters of adaptation, inventors of solutions, keepers of camaraderie, and witnesses to the relentless majesty of the sea, learning that endurance itself could be a triumph, even when survival felt uncertain at every turn. As months stretched into years, sailors found themselves trapped in a rhythm that blurred the distinction between time at sea and the passage of life itself. Campaigns lasted weeks, sometimes months, with only occasional glimpses of port or land, and even then, those moments were fleeting. Ships became self-contained worlds, floating fortresses where every man's actions influenced survival, and every mistake could be fatal. Long campaigns demanded endurance not just of the body, but of mind and spirit, a constant test of resilience that few could fully prepare for. The monotony of routine was punctuated by moments of extreme tension. Convoys sailed in strict formations, every ship a lifeline to the others, and the threat of enemy submarines or aircraft never fully dissipated. Men kept constant watch, scanning horizons, listening to the faint hums and echoes through the hull that might signal danger. Every sound became meaningful: the distant thrum of engines, the subtle clatter of loose equipment, the whisper of waves along the bow. Experience taught them that survival often depended on noticing the smallest detail before it escalated into disaster. Food and supplies became matters of ingenuity and careful planning. Fresh water was rationed, meals were calculated to stretch weeks of provisions, and even simple tasks like cooking required precision. Sailors developed creative ways to maintain nutrition and morale, combining small scraps of meat with powdered vegetables, baking simple breads in makeshift ovens, or fermenting fruits when available to create tangy preserves. Each successful meal was celebrated quietly, a small victory against the unyielding environment of the sea. Morale depended heavily on small rituals and routines. Cards and dice filled hours, letters from home became treasures, and storytelling flourished. A man might recount a tale of a port visit months ago, exaggerating encounters, weather, or the kindness of strangers to entertain and sustain hope. These stories were passed along, modified with each retelling, creating a shared mythology of life at sea that bonded sailors across decks and generations. Humor, even dark or absurd, became a vital survival tool, offering relief from the constant awareness of danger. Sleep remained a fragile commodity. Bunks were narrow, hammocks swayed, and the constant vibrations of engines and shifting cargo made uninterrupted rest rare. Dreams often mirrored reality. Men found themselves climbing slippery decks, hauling ropes, or diving into icy water, only to awaken and confront the same metal and salt around them. Exhaustion became a silent companion, sometimes dulling fear, sometimes sharpening anxiety, leaving men in a perpetual state of mental tension where the boundary between wakefulness and sleep was blurred. Extended campaigns revealed the psychological toll of isolation. Men longed for simple comforts: the smell of bread baking, the warmth of sunlight on grass, the sound of familiar voices from home. Letters offered connection, yet the gap between expectation and reality often deepened longing. Sailors spoke quietly in the dark, sharing memories, reciting poetry, or humming songs from childhood. Small threads of humanity stitched into the fabric of life at sea. The camaraderie that developed under pressure was intense. Bonds were formed quickly and could never be undone, because survival depended not only on skill, but on mutual trust and understanding. Storms were particularly brutal tests of endurance. Waves rose like walls, slamming against hulls with bone-jarring force. Wind tore at rigging and clothing. Rain fell in sheets that chilled men to the bone, and lightning illuminated decks in stark, terrifying flashes. Sailors clung to ropes, hauled lines, and fought to keep equipment secured. Even after storms passed, the aftermath demanded labor, repairing broken masts, patching leaks, and checking every inch of the vessel for hidden damage. Exhaustion compounded by fear became almost a physical weight, yet the work had to be done, every detail critical to the ship's survival. The presence of danger in every corner of life at sea meant that courage often took subtle forms. Some men risked their own safety to help a comrade repair a vital component. Others stood watch longer than required, scanning for threats that might not even exist. Small acts of bravery were constant, rarely recognized formally but deeply felt by those who witnessed them. Humor, discipline, and ingenuity became as important as physical strength or marksmanship. A ship could not survive on guns alone. Communication, too, was a delicate art. Signals from other ships, coded messages, and radio transmissions carried both vital information and danger, as intercepted messages could betray positions. Sailors learned to interpret incomplete data, trust in intuition, and adapt rapidly. Errors could cost lives, yet hesitation was dangerous, creating a tension that never fully lifted. The rhythm of campaigns became a dance with risk, where the line between survival and catastrophe was measured in seconds and inches. Even in moments of calm, the sea demanded respect. The vast horizon, stretching endlessly in every direction, carried with it an unspoken warning. Waves hit currents, storms could arise without warning, and the ocean itself could claim a life as easily as any enemy weapon. Sailors learned to read patterns, notice anomalies, and anticipate danger, but they also understood the limits of control. The sea was both teacher and adversary, indifferent to fear, courage, or exhaustion, shaping men's lives quietly but relentlessly. Life on long campaigns was therefore a continuous balance between fear and action, monotony and engagement, despair and fleeting joy. Every sunrise brought a mixture of routine and risk. Every sunset offered relief tempered by vigilance, and every mile traveled tested endurance, ingenuity, and spirit. In such a world, sailors became masters of adaptation, inventors of solutions, keepers of camaraderie, and silent witnesses to the vast, unforgiving power of the sea, learning every day that survival depended as much on patience and courage as on skill and discipline. The reality of war at sea was often sudden and unforgiving. A torpedo strike or bomb explosion could transform the familiar ship into a scene of chaos within seconds. Steel groaned under pressure, water gushed into compartments, and smoke curled through passageways, choking the air and obscuring vision. Men trained for emergencies moved instinctively, yet each situation brought unique challenges that no drill could fully prepare them for. The roar of engines, the hiss of escaping steam, and the clatter of loose equipment merged into a disorienting symphony that tested nerves and skill simultaneously. Damage control became the lifeline of survival. Sailors rushed to patch holes, plug leaks, and reinforce bulkheads with makeshift materials salvaged from debris. Ropes, planks, and even clothing were repurposed to stop water from spreading. Firefighting was an equally urgent priority. Flames could spread through confined spaces faster than men could react, and smoke inhalation posed as much danger as heat itself. Teams worked in silence or shouted only the most critical instructions, trusting instincts honed through countless drills. Even a minor misstep could end in disaster, yet hesitation was rarely an option. In these moments, heroism often went unseen. One sailor might crawl into a flooded compartment to rescue a trapped comrade, emerging soaked and exhausted, unnoticed by most of the crew except those who shared the same peril. Another might climb a mast during a storm to secure rigging while waves slashed against the hull, the wind threatening to sweep him overboard. Courage was rarely grandiose. It was in these quiet, relentless actions, performed without expectation of recognition, that men defined themselves and saved lives. Amid the chaos, communication became a vital skill. Orders had to be given clearly despite the roar of alarms and the confusion of panicked voices. Teams coordinated under pressure, moving supplies, securing equipment, and tending to the wounded. Sailors learned to anticipate one another's needs, developing a silent understanding forged through long hours of shared danger. Even minor improvisations, a plank repositioned here, a line tied there, could prevent catastrophe, demonstrating that survival often depended on ingenuity as much as bravery. The emotional weight of these moments was profound. Witnessing comrades injured or lost created a quiet, persistent sorrow that followed sailors long after the immediate danger passed. Some men retreated into themselves, silently processing grief while continuing their duties. Others found ways to cope through humor, storytelling, or physical exertion. The bonds formed under these extreme circumstances were unbreakable, a network of trust and reliance that carried men through the relentless tension of life at sea. Recovery after damage required endurance. Once fires were extinguished and flooding contained, crews repaired equipment, reinforced hulls, and ensured that critical systems were operational. Exhaustion was absolute. Men often worked for hours without rest, driven only by the necessity of survival and the unspoken commitment to their shipmates. Even routine tasks, cooking, cleaning, checking machinery, took on heightened significance in these conditions because every function of the ship was now a matter of life or death. The psychological strain of constant danger was compounded by isolation. Sailors were removed from family, friends, and the comforts of home for months or even years. Letters provided fleeting relief, but the physical presence of loved ones remained unattainable. Sleep was fitful, dreams haunted by explosions, drowning, or the faces of lost comrades. Yet the camaraderie on board provided a counterbalance. Shared stories, practical jokes, and small acts of kindness reminded men that they were not alone, that their collective strength was greater than any individual fear. Even in the aftermath of crisis, life resumed with relentless pace. Drills continued, meals were prepared, and watches maintained. Sailors adapted quickly, integrating lessons learned from each incident to prevent future catastrophes. These experiences became part of the ship's living memory, whispered among the crew, shared in casual conversations, and passed down to new arrivals who would one day take their place in the rhythm of survival. Storms, too, were a constant test of endurance, their fury rivaling that of enemy attacks. Waves towered like walls, rain lashed with blinding force, and the wind threatened to tear rigging and sails apart. Sailors clung to ropes, secured equipment, and moved with precision, each motion calculated to maintain balance and prevent disaster. Exhaustion blurred the line between fear and determination, yet every successful maneuver reinforced resilience. Nature, like war, was a teacher of limits, patience, and adaptability. In quieter moments, sailors reflected on the fragility of life at sea. Sunrises over calm waters were celebrated with gratitude, the glow of dawn painting the deck in golden hues. Shared meals, simple jokes, or even a quiet glance of understanding among comrades offered solace. These small moments of peace were fleeting, yet essential, creating a mental anchor amidst the constant threats of war. Life at sea during World War II was an endless oscillation between terror and resilience, despair and fleeting joy, monotony and intense action. Every day demanded vigilance, courage, and adaptability. Every mile traveled was a test of endurance, every storm a reminder of nature's indifference, and every battle an exercise in ingenuity and trust. Sailors lived in a world where the ocean was both adversary and constant companion, shaping lives in ways that few on land could comprehend, leaving memories and stories that would endure long after the war itself had passed. Even amid relentless danger, sailors found ways to preserve fragments of normalcy, to carve out moments that reminded them of life beyond the steel walls and salt air. Humor became an essential tool, a defense against fear and despair. Practical jokes circulated quietly through the mess hall. A boot filled with water, a rope tied just slightly wrong to surprise the unwary, or a sailor pretending to faint at a routine drill. Laughter, however brief, provided relief, a fleeting escape from the tension that otherwise weighed on every waking moment. Friendship was another lifeline. Bonds forged under duress were extraordinary. Men trusted one another with their lives, and that trust extended to all aspects of daily routine. Sharing rations, helping with maintenance, covering a comrade during watch. Each act reinforced a sense of interdependence that became the invisible structure holding the ship together. Quiet moments on deck often revealed the depth of these connections. A hand on a shoulder, a nod of understanding, or a shared cigarette under a blanket of stars became gestures of solidarity stronger than words. Superstitions and rituals proliferated, offering small measures of control in a world largely governed by chance and chaos. Sailors avoided whistling on deck, never crossed paths with certain objects, or touched charms for luck before entering a storm. Some carried small personal items, coins, trinkets, or letters tucked into uniforms as protective talismans. These practices, observed with a mixture of seriousness and humor, provided psychological comfort. In a place where death and disaster could arrive without warning, even the smallest ritual offered a sense of stability. Leisure took many forms, from card games to storytelling. Sailors passed time weaving tales of imagined adventures, recounting past victories, or creating elaborate myths about the seas they navigated. These stories were a blend of fact and embellishment, humor and fear, each retelling a form of mental exercise, sharpening creativity and sustaining morale. Music, when instruments were available, filled the air with melodies that echoed across decks, sometimes mournful, sometimes joyful, each note a reminder of humanity amidst the machinery and war. Letter writing was a lifeline to home. Even the simplest words from loved ones carried immense weight, bridging the vast distances between sailors and their families. Reading and rereading these letters offered comfort, hope, and fleeting moments of connection. Some men wrote pages at a time, imagining their words bringing solace to someone far away, unaware that their own spirits were nourished by the act itself. Mail deliveries, often sporadic, became occasions of celebration. Gatherings where letters were opened, read aloud, and discussed, reminding the crew that the world beyond the horizon still existed. The physical toll of long campaigns was unrelenting. Muscles ached from hauling lines, climbing rigging, or working machinery. Joints stiffened from constant motion on shifting decks, and injuries, even minor, were magnified in their impact. Sailors learned to pace themselves, to distribute effort over long watches, and to rely on one another for assistance. Simple routines, stretching, cleaning, sharpening tools, were not only practical but therapeutic, providing moments of mindfulness amid the chaos of life at sea. Weather, too, was a constant teacher. Calm seas brought a deceptive tranquility, encouraging reflection and planning, while storms demanded total engagement and vigilance. Sailors learned to read subtle cues: the smell of rain in the wind, the behavior of birds, the pattern of waves against the hull. Anticipating shifts in weather could prevent disaster, save lives, and preserve morale. Observing these patterns became both science and art, a form of intimate knowledge connecting men to a world larger than their own small quarters. Routines were punctuated by moments of creativity and innovation. Sailors improvised solutions to technical problems, crafted makeshift comforts, or adapted tools for unexpected needs. Even small successes, a patch that held, a meal that satisfied, a repair completed under pressure, offered profound satisfaction. These victories, though often invisible to outsiders, reinforced self-reliance and collective resilience, the invisible threads that bound the crew into a cohesive, functioning unit. Evenings, when the sky shifted to shades of violet and gold, became moments of reflection. Men would sit quietly on deck, observing the horizon, listening to the soft lap of waves, or engaging in hushed conversation. These periods of calm allowed the mind to process events, to remember those lost, to anticipate what lay ahead. Stars reflected on the water's surface, bioluminescent plankton glittered like tiny lanterns, and the endless expanse of sea and sky offered a subtle reminder of both insignificance and connection, a paradox sailors carried in their hearts. Through humor, friendship, ritual, creativity, and reflection, sailors cultivated resilience. They learned that survival was as much about mental endurance as physical strength, and that small gestures of care, small moments of joy, and fleeting distractions were essential tools in navigating the relentless tension of life at sea. Each day, each mile traveled, became a delicate balance between vigilance and reprieve, fear and hope, duty and the quiet, human need for connection. Life at sea was never easy, yet it was rich with experience, with moments of both terror and subtle triumph. Sailors lived in a world where danger was constant, yet human ingenuity, camaraderie, and the ability to find joy in the smallest of things ensured that life continued, wave after wave, day after day, under the watchful, indifferent expanse of the ocean that both threatened and defined them. Sometimes, despite careful planning, long campaigns brought moments when danger could no longer be avoided. Ships would suddenly find themselves under attack, the calm sea shattered by the roar of artillery, the hiss of strafing bullets, and the acrid smoke of distant explosions. Men moved with a mixture of practiced precision and raw instinct, knowing that hesitation could mean death. The chaos was overwhelming. Alarms blared, commands echoed, and even the most experienced sailors had to act instinctively, trusting training, intuition, and the men at their sides to navigate the storm of fire and steel. In these moments, the smallest details became crucial. A single misaligned hatch could flood a compartment, a moment's inattention could allow fire to spread unchecked, and even the placement of a sandbag could determine whether damage remained contained. Sailors learned to read the ship itself. The groan of a bulkhead, the vibration of engines, the subtle pitch of the deck, all became signals guiding action. Experience turned into instinct, and instinct often saved lives in situations where calculations and strategy alone were insufficient. Close quarters combat was particularly harrowing. Enemy planes swooped low, dropping bombs that shook the deck and sent sailors sprawling. Submarines lurked in the depths, unseen until the sudden flash of a torpedo trail signaled imminent destruction. Even on the open sea, the threat of mines or ambushes was constant. Sailors honed reflexes, maintaining vigilance over long hours, and every routine task became a potential test. Handling cargo, climbing rigging, or even moving across deck in heavy seas carried risk. The ocean and enemy alike demanded unwavering attention. Yet even in these intense engagements, the human element persisted. Fear and courage intertwined in every action. Men worked tirelessly to patch breaches, man guns, or tend to the wounded. One sailor might risk exposure to rescue a trapped comrade. Another improvised repairs while waves smashed against the hull. Heroism was rarely grandiose. It was in the quiet acts of resilience and ingenuity that life was preserved, often unnoticed by those outside the immediate crisis. These moments, small and persistent, shaped the culture of the ship, embedding a silent code of loyalty, trust, and shared responsibility. Amidst the tension, sailors developed a heightened awareness of the environment. They read the sky for approaching weather, listened for the faintest echoes in the hull indicating underwater threats, and watched for subtle changes in sea conditions. Even seemingly mundane tasks, checking fuel lines, adjusting ballast, securing cargo, were performed with precision, the consequences of error amplified by the omnipresent risk. Experience turned into an almost instinctive understanding of the ship as a living entity, one that responded to care, attention, and awareness, but could also betray negligence or distraction without warning. The psychological toll of these engagements was profound. Witnessing comrades injured or lost left a quiet, persistent weight on the mind. Sleep was often broken, dreams haunted by explosions or drowning, yet life aboard demanded continuation. Humor, camaraderie, and small rituals provided vital relief. Men shared stories, played cards, and engaged in playful competitions to break the tension, maintaining morale through the knowledge that even small distractions could mean the difference between despair and resilience. Extended missions meant adapting to constant stress. Supplies dwindled, fatigue accumulated, and isolation from home intensified longing. Sailors developed routines to manage both physical and mental strain, sharing duties, rotating watches, preserving rationed food carefully, and maintaining equipment with meticulous attention. Ingenuity became a survival skill, whether crafting makeshift tools, repurposing materials, or devising new ways to complete critical tasks under pressure. These adaptations demonstrated that life at sea required more than courage. It required continuous problem-solving, creativity, and collaboration. Even when not under direct attack, the ocean itself posed relentless challenges. Storms rose without warning, waves battered the hull, and wind threatened to tear rigging from masts. Sailors clung to ropes, secured cargo, and moved with deliberate care, each motion measured to maintain stability and prevent accidents. Exhaustion compounded by fear tested endurance. Yet the crew persisted, developing an intimate relationship with the ship, the sea, and the limits of human capability. Nature, like war, was an uncompromising teacher, demanding respect, vigilance, and resilience. In quieter moments, sailors found solace in small comforts. Letters from home, shared meals, conversations under the stars, or simple moments of reflection on calm waters. These moments reinforced a sense of connection, humanity, and hope, essential for enduring long campaigns in a hostile environment. The rhythm of life at sea oscillated between tension and reprieve, fear and camaraderie, despair and fleeting joy, each day a delicate balance shaped by both circumstance and human ingenuity. Life on board during World War II was a continuous lesson in adaptation, endurance, and silent heroism. Every mile traveled, every storm weathered, every attack survived contributed to a shared tapestry of experience and memory. Sailors became masters of resilience, inventors of solutions, and witnesses to the formidable power of the sea, learning daily that survival demanded not only skill, but courage, trust, and the quiet persistence to carry on when every hour brought new tests. Long stretches at sea brought their own unique challenges beyond enemy attacks or storms. When danger receded and routine dominated, sailors faced the subtle but relentless pressures of monotony, fatigue, and isolation. Without constant vigilance, mental exhaustion could take its toll, eroding judgment and morale. Yet the very rhythm of the sea demanded attention even in calm periods. To combat this, sailors invented ways to engage their minds and spirits, creating games, rituals, and creative diversions that infused life with purpose and humor, despite the ever-present risk lurking just beyond the horizon. Card games were a staple not merely for amusement, but as exercises in focus and strategy. Sailors wagered small tokens or scraps of chocolate, laughing and teasing in moments when tension could have been overwhelming. Dice games and simple competitions to spot seabirds, identify constellations, or guess the trajectory of distant waves became informal but vital practices, sharpening awareness while relieving stress. Even storytelling evolved into a mental sport, with exaggerated adventures, rival tales of bravery, or imaginary creatures populating the vast oceans around them. These diversions, while seemingly trivial, strengthened camaraderie and preserved mental sharpness, ensuring that the crew remained alert and cohesive even during the dullest stretches. In addition to games, sailors expressed themselves creatively with what limited resources they had. Sketches and scrap paper, poems scrawled on logs, and songs hummed quietly in the mess hall offered outlets for emotion and imagination. Some sailors constructed small models of ships or worked on mechanical improvisations, turning boredom into problem-solving exercises. Every act of creation, no matter how small, became a defiance of the monotony, a statement that life aboard the ship was still human, vibrant, and worth preserving even in the shadow of danger. Rituals and superstition played a subtle but profound role. Observing certain behaviors became a way to impose order on a chaotic environment. Sailors might carry a coin in a specific pocket, never whistle on deck, or maintain a strict personal routine before battle. While some of these practices were humorous or absurd, they served an essential psychological function, giving men a sense of control in circumstances governed largely by chance. The rituals reinforced discipline, minimized conflict, and created shared customs that bound men together in an unspoken culture of resilience. The quiet moments also revealed acts of courage and compassion that were rarely recognized. Sailors would tend to one another in ways both practical and emotional. A man who had suffered an injury or illness might be helped to climb ladders, carry out duties, or simply eat a meal prepared with care. Others offered comfort, listening to fears, recalling happier memories, or telling stories to lift spirits. These small gestures were as critical to survival as any skill in navigation or weaponry. They nurtured the mental and emotional endurance necessary to continue living amid the relentless pressure of wartime life. Maintaining physical readiness was another essential aspect of life during lulls. Exercises were improvised wherever possible, lifting ropes, climbing masts, hauling heavy cargo, or simply pacing the deck. These routines strengthened the body and offered a measure of control in an environment where so much was uncontrollable. In doing so, sailors honed resilience, developed coordination under shifting conditions, and prepared themselves for sudden emergencies, understanding that the ocean's calm could be deceptive and that danger could arrive in a heartbeat. Letters from home remained a lifeline, offering fleeting connection and relief. Men treasured every word, reading and rereading letters, sharing snippets with comrades, or saving them for moments of reflection during long watches. These connections to family, friends, and familiar worlds beyond the ocean horizon became mental anchors, sustaining hope and reminding sailors of life outside the ship's steel walls. The longing these letters provoked was tempered by the comfort they provided, a reminder that love and care endured despite distance and danger. Even amidst routine and quiet, sailors remained acutely aware of the unpredictability of their environment. Weather could shift in minutes. Enemy ships or submarines could appear without warning. Mechanical failures could escalate into life-threatening crises. These realities ensured that vigilance never waned, even in moments of relative calm. Mental games, routines, humor, and creativity were all tools to maintain readiness while preserving sanity, a delicate balance between preparation and the need for psychological reprieve. Nighttime brought both challenges and reflection. Men stood watch under stars, eyes scanning the horizon, ears listening to distant waves, engines, and creaks of the hull. Shadows cast by moonlight turned familiar equipment into strange forms, and the quiet often amplified minor noises into sources of anxiety. Yet night also offered clarity and perspective. The vast expanse of the ocean, the glimmer of distant lights, and the shared silence among comrades became moments of connection and introspection. Sailors learned to read the subtle signs of the sea and sky, using both knowledge and intuition to navigate uncertainty. Life at sea was, therefore, a tapestry woven from extremes: fear and laughter, monotony and crisis, isolation and camaraderie, despair and hope. Every day demanded vigilance, ingenuity, and emotional resilience. Every small victory, whether repairing a leak, completing a watch without incident, or lifting the spirits of a comrade, was a triumph of human endurance. Sailors became masters not only of seamanship and combat, but of the subtler art of surviving the mind's quiet battles, discovering that courage and creativity were as vital as skill and discipline in a world dominated by water, wind, and war. Extended convoy missions defined much of a sailor's life, a continuous journey where vigilance never ceased and the horizon always held potential danger. Ships traveled in tight formations, each vessel depending on the others for protection, communication, and coordination. The routine of navigation, watch duty, and maintenance was punctuated by the constant awareness that enemy submarines could be lurking unseen, waiting for the slightest mistake or miscalculation. Every decision mattered. Every action, no matter how small, could influence survival. Convoy life demanded intricate coordination. Orders were transmitted via flags, lights, or radio signals, and misinterpretation could be fatal. Sailors learned to read subtle changes in the movement of nearby ships. A slight alteration in speed, a deviation in course, or even the timing of signal flashes might indicate an enemy threat. These skills, refined over months and years, were essential for both the safety of the ship and the cohesion of the fleet. In some cases, men could anticipate enemy maneuvers almost instinctively, the result of countless hours of observation and experience. Threats came from many directions. Submarines patrolled deep waters, torpedoes streaked silently through the ocean, and aircraft could appear suddenly, their bombs and strafing runs turning familiar decks into chaos. Even the ocean itself posed challenges. Sudden storms, rogue waves, and shifting currents could endanger vessels with or without enemy intervention. Every sailor became attuned to the environment, reading wind patterns, wave shapes and distant sounds with precision, developing a near-intuitive connection to the sea that could mean the difference between life and death. Meals on convoy missions were simple yet vital. Canned food, salted meat, and hard biscuits formed the bulk of sustenance, rationed carefully to last weeks at a time. Fresh produce was rare, and water had to be conserved meticulously. Despite the monotony, sailors took pride in small achievements in the galley. A stew prepared with limited ingredients, a creative way to combine rations, or the occasional luxury of a freshly baked loaf brought moments of joy and morale. Sharing these small victories fostered camaraderie, reminding men that even in austere conditions, life could hold simple pleasures. Sleeping arrangements were cramped and uncomfortable. Hammocks swung with the ship's motion, often placed so closely that sailors brushed shoulders as they slept. Noise, engine vibrations, and the occasional crash of equipment made uninterrupted rest nearly impossible. Yet even short periods of sleep were precious, allowing the body and mind to recover enough for the relentless demands of the next watch. Dreams often reflected reality. Men found themselves hauling ropes, navigating treacherous waters, or reacting to imaginary alarms, a subconscious rehearsal for the constant pressures of life at sea. During extended missions, boredom became a subtle but pervasive adversary. Men devised creative ways to remain alert and engaged. Card games, storytelling, and small competitions tested attention, skill, and memory, keeping minds sharp despite repetitive tasks. Sailors also found opportunities for personal projects. Sketching, writing letters, or crafting small tools and objects from available materials. These activities, while modest, provided mental stimulation, a sense of accomplishment, and moments of psychological relief in an otherwise demanding environment. Communication between ships was critical and precise. Any lapse could result in disaster. Sailors developed systems of observation and signaling, interpreting even minor irregularities in lights or flag positions. Coordination extended to defensive maneuvers, anticipating enemy approaches, and optimizing routes through hazardous waters. Even small deviations from protocol could cascade into significant risks, highlighting the importance of discipline, focus, and trust among the crew. Weather remained an unpredictable adversary. Storms could arrive without warning, battering the hull with waves, whipping the decks with wind, and threatening equipment and personnel alike. Sailors worked tirelessly to secure rigging, maintain balance, and protect vital systems, often performing physically exhausting tasks under extreme conditions. The ocean's power was humbling, yet every storm survived reinforced resilience, confidence, and the intimate understanding that life at sea demanded both skill and respect for forces far beyond human control. Friendship and morale were continuously tested and strengthened during convoy missions. Sailors relied on one another not only for practical survival but for emotional support. Sharing jokes, recalling memories from home, offering small acts of assistance, and simply being present in moments of stress created bonds of trust that were essential for enduring the relentless demands of convoy life. Even minor gestures, a cigarette offered, a seat shared, a word of encouragement, became significant acts of solidarity. Life on convoy missions was a constant oscillation between vigilance, physical labor, and mental endurance. Each day presented a mixture of routine, danger, and unexpected challenge, requiring sailors to remain alert, adaptable, and resourceful. Every mile traveled tested skill, courage, and resilience, while every successful maneuver, repair, or act of kindness reinforced the fragile but enduring human spirit that made life at sea survivable. Sailors learned that the ocean, the enemy, and the monotony were all adversaries to be met with ingenuity, discipline, and unwavering trust in one another. Even during the longest and most perilous missions, sailors found moments to claim small victories, subtle achievements that brought reassurance, morale, and a fleeting sense of control. Successfully repairing a leaking bulkhead, patching a torn sail, or restoring a vital piece of machinery could lift the entire crew's spirits, turning ordinary labor into triumphs against the ever-present threats of sea and war. Each accomplishment, no matter how modest, reaffirmed skill, resilience, and the intricate bond between men and ship. These victories were celebrated quietly, often with humor, a shared meal, or simply a moment of rest, the relief palpable yet understated. Humor was a subtle but powerful force aboard. Sailors developed a rich culture of playful teasing, practical jokes, and running gags that lightened the burden of monotony and fear. Someone might borrow a colleague's boots, replace a towel with a rope, or exaggerate tales of imaginary sea monsters, eliciting laughter even in the tightest quarters. These exchanges, seemingly trivial, provided critical emotional relief, reminding men that even amid danger and deprivation, human connection and the ability to laugh persisted. Humor became a survival mechanism, a way to balance tension and maintain perspective. Yet beneath camaraderie and laughter, hidden tensions simmered. Fatigue, prolonged stress, and isolation magnified small irritations, sometimes sparking arguments or moments of silent resentment. Disagreements over duties, rations, or strategies could flare briefly, only to be smoothed by shared understanding or the immediate necessity of cooperation. Sailors learned to navigate these social dynamics with care, knowing that unity could mean the difference between life and death during crises. Subtle gestures of compromise, patience, and quiet leadership ensured that tensions never escalated beyond what the fragile social equilibrium could sustain. Food remained both necessity and source of ritualized comfort. Rations were monotonous yet carefully prepared, turning small innovations into cherished experiences. Salted meats might be mixed with the rare fresh vegetables, biscuits softened into stews, and any scarce luxury, coffee, chocolate, or canned fruit, was shared generously, reinforcing bonds. Meals were also social events, occasions for storytelling, joke-telling, or informal competitions about who could consume the most of a particular ration without complaint. Even the simplest successes in the galley brought satisfaction, a rare but essential reminder of life beyond mere survival. Leisure was inventive. Sailors wrote letters in bursts of careful penmanship, sometimes imagining the reactions of loved ones, sometimes crafting playful tales to entertain both themselves and the recipients. Sketches and small crafts occupied hands and minds, and impromptu games filled the mess hall or deck. Card games, board competitions, and even contests of balance or dexterity on a pitching deck provided engagement, entertainment, and subtle reinforcement of focus and coordination. Every activity, while seemingly trivial, contributed to mental and emotional resilience. The sea itself was both companion and adversary. Calm waters offered rare tranquility. Gentle lapping of waves, distant gulls, and the endless horizon provided moments of reflection and beauty. Sailors would quietly observe constellations, note shifts in the wind, or marvel at the glow of bioluminescent plankton beneath the hull. These moments nurtured introspection and perspective, a reminder of the world beyond the ship and the vast forces that shaped life at sea. Yet even in calm, vigilance remained essential. Storms could arrive without warning, waves could overturn the unprepared, and enemy forces might appear suddenly. Sleep continued to be precious and fragmented. Narrow hammocks, constant motion of the ship, and distant engine vibrations made deep rest difficult. Sailors adapted by learning to rest lightly, to recognize when to conserve energy, and to maintain alertness even in short intervals of sleep. Dreams often reflected reality. Alarms sounded, waves surged, or comrades called for help, rehearsing scenarios that might arise in waking life. This interplay between rest and preparedness became an essential skill, sustaining endurance and mental acuity over long campaigns. Despite hardships, sailors maintained a sense of identity and culture aboard. Shared stories, songs, and rituals formed an intricate social web, reinforcing tradition, continuity, and cohesion. Even personal quirks, superstitions, or small habits were tolerated and sometimes celebrated, forming a rich tapestry of human experience in a confined, high-stress environment. These subtleties reinforced unity, preserved morale, and provided a sense of normalcy in the otherwise extraordinary conditions of wartime service. Every day at sea was a delicate balance between vigilance, endurance, creativity, and subtle social navigation. Small victories, shared laughter, inventive diversions, and moments of reflection intertwined with relentless responsibility, danger, and environmental challenges. Life in convoy missions was never static. Every hour demanded adaptation, resourcefulness, and resilience. Sailors learned that survival depended as much on mental agility, social skill, and emotional intelligence as on seamanship, courage, or technical ability. Each day was a continuous negotiation between the pressures of war, the forces of nature, and the human need for connection, purpose, and fleeting joy. Convoy missions often brought the harshest tests in the form of close encounters with enemy ships and aircraft, moments when skill, courage, and split-second decision-making determined survival. Sailors learned to watch not only their own ship but the movements of every vessel in the formation, noting subtle changes that could signal danger. The sight of distant silhouettes on the horizon, the sudden shadow of an aircraft passing overhead, or an unexplained ripple in the water demanded immediate attention. Every sense became heightened, each detail potentially the difference between safety and catastrophe. When attacks came, chaos erupted in ways both predictable and unexpected. Explosions shook the deck, sending equipment flying and forcing men to scramble to secure themselves and their comrades. Alarms blared, orders were shouted, and crews executed drills honed through countless rehearsals. Yet no training could fully simulate the intensity of a real assault. Sailors manned guns, launched countermeasures, patched breaches, and fought fires simultaneously, a coordinated ballet of survival under relentless pressure. Every movement, every decision had weight. Hesitation could cost lives, but panic was equally dangerous. Evasion required strategy and creativity. Captains and officers relied on maps, intelligence reports, and the natural behavior of the sea to maneuver safely. Sudden course changes, coordinated with nearby vessels, allowed convoys to avoid submarines lying in wait. Smoke screens, zigzagging maneuvers, and careful timing of signals reduced visibility to attackers, buying precious seconds. Sailors below deck reinforced bulkheads, secured sensitive equipment, and checked engines, understanding that the success of evasion depended on both leadership and meticulous execution of routine procedures. Acts of bravery, often quiet and unnoticed, emerged constantly. A sailor might crawl into a flooded compartment to rescue a trapped comrade, risking drowning or injury. Another would climb exposed rigging to repair a mast under the lash of wind and rain, knowing that a failure could doom the ship. Each act was a blend of courage, skill, and necessity, performed without expectation of recognition, yet vital for survival. Heroism at sea was rarely grandiose. It was persistent, adaptive, and deeply human. Even during engagements, small gestures of humanity persisted. Sailors offered comfort to the injured, reassured the frightened, and shared meager rations to maintain morale. Humor and levity, sometimes as simple as a whispered joke or a shared glance, helped crews maintain composure amidst fear. Storytelling, songs, and light-hearted competitions continued in brief lulls, sustaining camaraderie even when danger was imminent. The delicate interplay of courage, humor, and care defined life aboard, illustrating that survival was as much about emotional resilience as technical skill. Technical skill was tested relentlessly. Gunners adjusted to rapidly moving targets. Engineers worked feverishly to keep engines operational, and navigators recalculated courses on the fly. Sailors became attuned to every vibration, every shift in balance, every unusual sound, allowing them to anticipate mechanical failures or signs of enemy activity. Even small successes, patching a breach, restoring a disabled gun, or preventing equipment from falling overboard, could be decisive, demonstrating the critical importance of skill, observation, and teamwork in high-pressure situations. The psychological strain of close encounters was profound. Fear was constant, anxiety persistent, and the specter of death a near-permanent presence. Sailors developed coping mechanisms, often unconsciously, focusing intensely on immediate tasks, relying on routines, or mentally breaking challenges into manageable steps. Humor, superstition, and camaraderie became crucial tools for maintaining balance, helping men endure the tension and uncertainty that defined life at sea. Environmental factors complicated every encounter. Storms could arise mid-engagement, adding layers of difficulty. Waves threatened to toss sailors overboard, wind altered trajectories, and rain reduced visibility to near zero. Crews adapted swiftly, using ropes, harnesses, and teamwork to stabilize both personnel and equipment. Nature itself became an unpredictable partner in the struggle, teaching lessons in patience, improvisation, and respect for forces beyond human control. Even after an engagement ended, recovery demanded resilience. Crews assessed damage, tended to the wounded, repaired equipment, and restored order while remaining alert for further threats. Exhaustion was absolute, yet work continued without pause, driven by the necessity of survival and the understanding that the ocean and the enemy remained indifferent to fatigue. Each repaired bulkhead, each functioning gun, each steady hand during watch was a triumph, a testament to endurance, skill, and human determination. Close encounters highlighted the interdependence of sailors and ship alike. Every action, from the smallest adjustment of a line to the most critical repair of a gun, contributed to collective survival. Success relied on attention, coordination, and trust, reinforcing bonds of loyalty and shared purpose. Life aboard was an intricate balance of vigilance, skill, and courage, where even fleeting moments of calm were precious and brief, but every small victory strengthened the crew's ability to face what lay ahead.